remember that they're changing my voice. No offense, but I'm sure we can all agree that this has to be said. God doesn't want me to prioritize decoding the Bible. Okay, it says things in a roundabout way that points to what you know already. For example, the green leaves, right? The leaf of the trees, right? The righteous thrive like a green leaf. It's unnecessary to say it that way. It's unnecessary to speak in a code where you say the leaves will wither. Like, you don't need to say that, right? You can say the righteous, will cease to exist, or people will be less righteous. So why say it in a roundabout way? And so it is with, Hebrews 9, which is what this video is about. Okay? Worship in the earthly tabernacle. There's a lot of people who play occult games, right? Satan's so-called deep secrets, which goes back to the scribes who wrote the Bible. Okay? So I'm not going to spend, a year explaining all the connections to the lampstand, to the Ark of the Covenant, the curtain, and so on and so forth. These things are pointing to the things I talk about all the time in a roundabout way. Okay? So Hebrews 9, worship in the earthly tabernacle. And the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was set up. In his first room were the lampstand and the table with this consecrated bread, which was called the holy place, right? The bread of the presence of God, right? So God's present in the first room. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold cover Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so gold stands for wisdom, bread stands for the bread of the presence, the bread of the righteous presence, first and foremost God's presence. Okay, a golden altar is to be wise, and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of occultists, rapists, Satanists, rapists in the church. Churches are basically satanic centers, mosques and synagogues, no offense, but I'm sure it's obvious these days. If you don't know that, why not? How could you not know that? They're playing a witchcraft game. They're got everyone playing stupid. They're coercing people. They're using psychology. I'll debate you on this anytime. The evidence is overwhelming. Look at how many sex crimes are committed. Look at their lack of a response. It all points to that. You can argue semantics with me all day, okay? So maybe you're confused by the semantics, but you know what I mean. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. All these things are a long story. Okay, what it symbolizes when Aaron's staff had budded, God was pleased with them. He said, go that way with it. It symbolizes a certain order, and on and on and on and on and on. Okay, but to make a long story short, there's one room that's for just the presence, the body of people trying to be right with God. There's a holy room that not everyone's supposed to go into that symbolizes the most sacred place where the king goes, the King of Kings. Okay. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory overshadowing the atonement cover. But we cannot discuss these things in detail now. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry out their ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance. So the blood of the goats and all this stuff, okay, the calves and what have you, was to try to go through the motions, right? It didn't actually remove sin. We'll get to that in Hebrews 10. But it was to go through the motions of cleansing sin. So people worship the devil, right, which is all the churches, the mosques, basically everyone else but me, and then my parents are blameless, so it's, they all worship the devil. They're just, like it says in the New Testament, right, they're paying God lip service. They're doing meaningless ritual ceremonies and empty sacrifices, okay? And that's the idea of the devil. He's confusing you about what he's doing, okay? Like it says in Western literature, the devil says that the mind is a place of its own and that it can magically make heaven out of hell, which is a sick, sick lie. It can pretend like a little kid that never grew up with no heart. And an adult pretending is a very pitiful, pitiful sight, I assure you. Okay. So above the ark were the cherubim of the glory overshadowing the atonement cover. We cannot discuss these things in detail now. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry out their ministry, but only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit was showing by this that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. This is an illustration for the present time, indicating that the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. They are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. Okay, so there's going to be a new order, right? So the new world order, new secular, new novus order of seclorum, is an order of Satan for people who remains. The new order of God is people who, like in Isaiah 57, are taken away from the planet to be spared from the despicable existence of being a worm in the new secular order for those who remain, who worship the devil, who rape kids, da-da-da-da-da. They're yoked to the people. They're in the spirit of raping kids. They're in the spirit of being some coward who's afraid to man up, the spirit of doing psychology instead of reality, what have you. Okay. The blood of Christ. But when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands. This is to say, is not part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and cows, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption, something that has occurred already. Okay, according to the story and reality. The righteous from before, they died and made a point. And they said, die and don't accept being in the New World Order. Okay, accept death and rallying to the king instead of accepting the mark of the beast. Okay, separating the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the tares, who does what have you. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean, right? But first clean the inside of the cup and dish, then the outside will be clean, right? It says in Matthew 23, I believe it is. How much more then with the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. Notice the word conscious is like the word conscience, because the scientist, the astrologer, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, these types of people, pharmakeia, meaning sorcery, pharmaceuticals, these guys use psychology, right? Minister and administering drugs, right? They administer poison. They don't deal in reality. But the reality of your conscience, God consciousness, is not a conscience. Okay? It's the truth. Okay. For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise eternal inheritance now, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. Okay, this is part of why you should rally to me and not to anyone else, and not rely on the Bible, because they're interfering with my speech. So when I have to say it their way, or you go to their churches, then you're going to hell. You need to hear it from me in person. See, no one is less ideal, less successful, and less spiritually powerful than those who try to tell me what to do. How childish is that? Grow up. I mean, literally, grow up and stop reproducing, because you're not good parents. Shouldn't have to explain this. Okay. In the case of a will, it is necessary to prove the death of the one who made it, because a will is in force only when someone has died. It never takes effect while the one who made it is living. This is why even the first covenant was not put into effect without blood. When Moses had proclaimed every command of the law to all the people, he took the blood of calves together with water, scarlet wool, and branches of hyssop, and sprinkled the scroll and all the people. He said, "This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you to keep." In the same way, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and everything used in its ceremonies. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Without shedding your blood, there's no forgiveness. And we'll get to that later. I think it's Hebrews 12, where it says, you have not yet resisted the point of shedding your blood. Okay, you're supposed to die a martyr in the divine order if the world doesn't treat you fairly, okay? And it's not. So you're supposed to keep pushing and pushing, doing God's work until they kill you. Okay, what the hell don't you get? John the Baptist, Stephen the Martyr, early Christians, Jesus himself. Come on now. It was necessary then for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things made themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands. That was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that is not his own. Otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. That happened already. Just as people are destined to die once and after that to face judgment, so Christ will sacrifice once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. It is vital that you understand that the Greek word for well is the same word as the word for covenant.